Podmoth.
Testing. Bones. Radius. Ulna.
Humerus. The inner ear one. There's 3, I think, actually. Never mind.
Stapes. Fibula.
In olden days, a glimpse of femur was only for morbid dreamers, but you're not alone. Bring anything bones. 2 goofy gals with deathly interest go on a skeleton inquest in your headphones. Anything bones.
Hello and welcome to Anything Bones. I'm Sophie Schwartz, and this is the show where we talk about bones and bone-related topics. On this episode today, we are not going to be joined by Caitlin, but we have the distinct pleasure of being joined by an extra special guest. This guest has actually been on the team since the very beginning, and their name may sound quite familiar to you. It is Camilla Franklin, improviser, illustrator, and trivia writer, and the creator of our logo.
Yay! Hello! Oh, I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I mean, it has been like you have been here all along, but to finally get you on the podcast, to get your bony thoughts, is a true pleasure.
Yeah, I should say it's, to be here in voice as well as in invisible hand.
Yeah, your logo is a huge part of our brand, but also it's one of the things that got us so excited about starting the podcast, because I've known you as a performer, an improviser, a director of Me for a very spooky show that was an improvised long form play?
Yeah, it was a play. It was an improvised play.
Yeah, based on the works of Lemony Snicket. But we reached out to you and we said, Camilla, would you be down to create this logo for us? You said, what do you want? We said, bones.
Mm-hmm. I looked up some clip art for shapes of different bones to make sure I knew what all the different kinds of bones looked like. And then I drew a bunch. The ones that made it onto the art are the ones that turned out the best. But in all seriousness, it was so fun to draw.
Yeah, and I love our happy skeleton man. The skeleton man has no gender, unless you want to reveal.
Oh my goodness. Maybe I can save the reveal for my bone story later, actually.
Oh, what a teaser.
Yeah.
What a teaser. That's amazing. But kind of as we hinted at, this is not your first ride on the spooky horse.
Another reveal, I am the Headless Horseman.
Oh, gosh darn it. I knew that head looked fake.
I love taking a ride on the spooky horse.
Oh, yeah. Catch me, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. That's Paul Revere. He was kind of spooky, wasn't he?
The original Headless Horseman, Paul Revere.
Well, I'm saving this for a Halloween episode, but there are some things about the Legend of Sleepy Hollow that are historically accurate.
Ooh.
Yes, teaser for October episodes. I've been wanting to shoot the gun indoors all this month. I've been just chafing at the bit with spooky topics. But what I was going to say is, what is your affiliation with spooky things? Are you a Halloween lover? Are you less so?
I would say I am a big fan of the delightfully eerie, but I am not necessarily that macabre. So, like, the Edward Gorey illustrations were a big thing in my childhood. The Lemony Snicket, the sort of exploring the creepy in a very, like, in a surprisingly warm and affirming way.
Yes. There is to your art and to your performances, there is a warm yet sometimes eerie vibe.
That's I think my most comfortable, not the sweet spot, but the spooky spot. Yeah.
The spooky spot, yes. Well, gosh darn it, another great name for this podcast. The spooky spot.
Spooky spot.
That's what it's going to be called for all of October.
Yeah, it must be hard coming up with topics to cover in September because it's October adjacent.
Yes, that's the thing, is that, like I was just saying, I have a lot of stuff that I want to do for October because that's spooky season proper. But I truly believe that September is the lead up. It's the calm before the storm, as it were. And it's kind of hard to figure out with this podcast what is scary and what isn't. Because we do a lot of archaeological topics, and that's bones, but I wouldn't say it's scary. But it's all kind of falls under this macabre umbrella. So trying to find stuff that is specifically like more in the paranormal, more in the like version of things, you know?
Yeah, that sound puts it better than any sequence of words could.
Well, you know, when you're at a loss for words, you have to let your spirit speak. And that's what was happening there.
It's like in musical theater when they break into song because you can't express it with spoken word anymore.
No, certainly not. And actually, I was going to ask you, speaking of not being able to express things in spoken word, one of your strengths is improvised musicals. Would you care to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's about the spookiest thing one could do is getting up in front of people and singing.
Yeah.
And making up those lyrics.
Yeah.
Yeah. I made you all do it because I find it delightful, but it might have been a cruel ask.
No, it's one of the coolest things anyone has ever taught me is how to make up songs on the spot.
It can be really, really fun, and I think nothing makes an ensemble closer than having to sing a song together. But my group that I'm in, Fancy Cafeteria, we had some shows back. We did some outdoor shows this weekend for the first time in years, and it was so exciting, but I also, all my bones hurt today because I forgot that in musicals you're constantly squatting and bobbing along in time with a song.
Yeah,
and
not to mention like full-on dancing, which you guys like do.
We try, I try. There's some video of the show that I watched where we were all like marching in place and everyone was doing a cool march and my arms just weren't moving past the elbows. I was just like a little drummer boy.
Oh, little drummer bones.
Little drummer bones. Playing my ribcage like a skeleton, like a little xylophone.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of xylophones and bones, should we just get right on into it?
Yeah, let's get right on into it.
We came for bones, and gosh darn it, we'll have
there's gonna be bones!
Oh, there's gonna be bones! Alright, so like I said, I've been wanting it to be October in the worst way, but it isn't. And we can't, what is the technical term? Blow our load on September.
The technical term.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided to dip into a well that I go to a lot, and I promise you all, boneheads, this will not become the Ancient Egypt show, but for the past 2 weeks, yeah, it's going to be the Ancient Egypt show, because Egyptians did death like nobody else, and we just keep finding more and more of their cool shit. And one of the places that I've talked about a lot before on this podcast is the necropolis, the burial area, Saqqara, which is a burial spot near Cairo that has been used for over 3,000 years in its heyday. And I want to give a little bit of background on that and talk about a tomb of particular interest in this necropolis. Yeah, a tomb with a twist, one might say.
The teases in this episode are too many by far.
The tomb twist teases, yeah. Okay, so sources for this bad boy, we have National Geographic, 2 Wikipedia articles, an article from Live Science, an article from worldarchaeology.com, and an article from InsideArabia.com. All right, Saqqara. So we're about 20 miles south of Cairo on the west bank of the Nile, and this is a beautiful burial site that stretches out into the desert. The cool thing about Saqqara is, like I said, it's right next to Cairo, and you can see, I'll send you a picture here, of how the desert, there's like lush, I wouldn't call it jungle, but foliage coming up to basically what is a road, and then the vast expanse of this desert burial site with this huge step pyramid right in the center.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's a sort of pyramid shape that I associate less with ancient Egyptian pyramids.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is actually the first and the oldest step pyramid in Egyptian history. So this burial ground was established next to the city of Memphis during the early dynastic period, which is 2900 to 2649 BC. So we're talking a while ago.
Time spans in BC when you go forward by going less negative really messes with my brain.
Yeah, in BC we go backward to go forward.
Yeah.
Which always, it fucks my dyslexic brain up something fierce. I'm like, is this correct?
Sometimes, though, you have to go backwards to go forwards.
Oh, my God. I can't do the show because you've blown my mind.
Some deep thoughts.
Deep thoughts from the step pyramid. So this step pyramid is built in the 27th century BC, and it is the resting place of Dozier, and he was a pharaoh in the Old Kingdom, and he, like I said, he started the tradition of building pyramids as royal monuments, and it's also his, burial complex is the oldest known complete stone structure in history.
Wow.
Wrap your fucking brain around that.
Wow.
It's the oldest known complete stone structure in history.
Imagine your claim to fame in history being that.
Yeah, you have the first and oldest pyramid.
You kicked off the tradition of pyramids as a burial site, and also while you're at it, just the first stone one.
Yeah, just, shaping the cultural identity of your people for, millennium.
Hey,
it's
just
fine.
Pitching it here. What if we built things out of stone so that they lasted a really long time?
There's a guy in the corner who sells wood going, no, boo.
Yeah, wood lobby, not a fan.
Yeah, well, that's big wood for you. Okay, so Saqqara is home to a few other pyramids as well. Also the ruins of temples, tombs, walkways, and countless other burial sites of importance. And although we tend to think about, like we were just saying, we tend to think about Egypt as having these pyramids, these great above-ground monuments, right? Well, Saqqara is very much known for its underground, subterranean kick-ass tombs.
Excellent.
So, unfortunately, this burial site does fall into disrepair and disuse after its 3,000 years of use, which is insane.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Do you
please.
know if initially it was the burial site for Dozier and then they started burying other people there too, or whether it was like a ramp up? We'll bury all the folks here and then Dozier gets the big spot.
I think he kicked it off.
Okay.
I think his was the first big monument there, and then everyone was like, well, because he's buried there, I would like to be buried there as well. And it was really, really hot until kind of the Middle Kingdom, when it died out and people were like, it's passé to be buried there. And then it came roaring back in the New Kingdom. They were like, hey, we're going back to Saqqara. And it was in use until the switch over into the Roman era. So pretty much all of what we would categorize as ancient Egypt, Saqqara was in use.
I'm imagining it being the equivalent of one of those historic Hollywood cemeteries.
Yeah,
where people would go on tours and be like, here's where this famous person's buried. Here's where this famous person's buried. If you're rich enough, maybe you could be buried here too.
Yes, welcome to Saqqara Forever Cemetery. But, it was very grand in its day, but of course, like all things in archaeology, time takes its toll. There was a lot of looting of this site, unfortunately. A lot of mummies were taken for fertilizer, and it was pretty ransacked by white tourism. Yay. Good job. And they made off with mummies of people, animals, cats, ibises, baboons, all the fun mummies. And kind of the significance of this site was not really known to, in one of the articles it said, people never paid attention to this site until this one guy came, and it's like, no, Eurocentric archaeology did not pay attention to this site until this French Egyptologist, Auguste Marinet. He came to Egypt in 1850 and he visited Saqqara. And he has a great quote on it. He says it was, quote, a spectacle of utter devastation. referring to the fact that at that time there were a lot of like open burial pits and kind of uneven ground, and the place has been kind of looted to shit where you could get in, you know? But so he saw that the sand was, you know, in the sand there was mummy wrappings and there was bones. And so he was immediately intrigued by it and started digging around, and he found this like half-buried statue of a sphinx. And then, as I wrote here, being a nosy motherfucker, he dug further and found an entire sphinx-lined avenue that led to this beautiful temple called Sarapenam. And under this temple were tunnels that held coffins of mummified bulls, which were offers to Ta and Osiris. So he finds this super significant temple, and everyone's like, oh, does Saqqara have cool stuff?
I'm just thinking about how, in the spirit of things going out of style and coming back in style, Sphinx-lined avenues.
Let's bring them back.
What an incredible thing to uncover.
Well, it's just the nature of this area is that we don't have any idea how many burial sites are there. You know, we've uncovered such a small portion of it, but what we have found is incredible. You know, huge caches of animal mummies. They found 8 million. Yeah, I said million dog mummies. 8 million dog mummies.
That's more than the population of the city that we live in by so much.
Yeah, we could all have a dog mummy and then some.
We could each have many dog mummies.
Yes. And, you know, not to mention all the great human tombs, dating back, 6,000, 7,000 years. Some of them completely untouched, with these beautiful reliefs that have retained their color due to the fact that they're in like a subterranean environment.
Are the subterranean areas, are they sort of stone tunnels, or is it more of a burial in sand?
It is stone tunnels. We're going to look at a particular tomb here in a second that is going to kind of show you the structure of these, but I'll tell you that it's like a shaft going into the ground, or sometimes if they can dig it out like at kind of ground level into like a rectangular type of temple, and then there will be burial shafts underneath that temple.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'll have a picture for you later. Oh. So Saqqara's importance, through the ages of, it finally being recognized by white archaeology has become, and for the Egyptian people, this is an incredibly important site. I watched an amazing documentary. One of my sources, I realized I forgot to say, was the documentary on Netflix called Secrets of the Saqqara Tomb, and that's directed by James Tovell. And it is an incredible documentary. If you're interested in Egyptology, you should absolutely watch it, because you can see people like taking stuff out of the ground and like going into these vaults and seeing these tombs like firsthand.
Are there any really cool close-ups of people with like a little toothbrush, paintbrush, dusting things off an artifact?
You betcha. Oh, you betcha.
Those are my
That's
favorites.
So much.
My favorite shot in an archaeology movie is someone with a little toothbrush cleaning an artifact.
Yes, they are in there with their little toothbrush. There's a lot of great scenes of people picking stuff up out of the sand and being like, what is this? There's even one where they find half a statue and they find the other half of the statue later and they put it together in front of you. Mm-hmm, it fits perfectly. Wow. One of the guys says that. Mm-hmm.
That's how you know.
That's how you know. And I was like, is this fake? And I was like, I don't know. It's Saqqara. It's littered with, like, you can't trip without falling over somebody's grave goods.
Is there, because it was used as a burial site during 2 very different time periods, mm-hmm. were the styles of burial and traditions surrounding that super different?
They were different. Because like we said, in the first period of burial, everyone was really more inspired by Dozier. So we see a lot of more above ground structures. And then after the rest of the Middle Period, like the rest in use, we see more of these subterranean tombs. So let's get to why we came to Saqqara, because we came for a certain tomb.
Okay.
And I want to talk about this tomb because, like I said at the top, it's a tomb with a twist. To me, it represents how there are all these different tombs in Saqqara, and each of them has a story. And we're going to look at this one. So we're going to talk about the tomb of Wate. And I know I'm saying that right because I watched the documentary. So in November of 2018, an incredibly intact tomb is uncovered under about 16 feet of sand. And all they are able to prove about it when they first find it is that it's belonged to someone who is extremely well connected, and his name was Wate.
Did it say on the tomb?
Yes, it says his name
Great.
all over the tomb.
Nice branding.
Exactly. Oh, he's got a strong brand.
Always be networking, even post-mortem.
Whoa, you'd get along with the Egyptians so well. But his tomb had not been disturbed in 4,400 years. So can you imagine being the first person to look in there after 4,000 years?
I'm trying to imagine how many years that even is. I mean, I know it numerically, but it's hard to fathom.
I mean, it is the history of our country many times over. But the cool thing about this tomb is that it is exceptionally well preserved. The colors on the reliefs of the walls are almost exactly as they would have been when they were first painted. And beneath the tomb, there are 5 burial shafts. And we can kind of tell that because I'll show you some pictures, but there are like indentations on the floor where you can see these square burial shafts where if you were to dig down, you would find the occupants of the tomb. So from what hieroglyphics are telling us, we know that our buddy Wate worked for King Neferkare, who ruled during the Old Kingdom in Egypt's 5th dynasty. So that's the first round of burials.
Yeah.
Here.
He's been here for a long time.
He OG.
Enough to just really be annoyed at the kids. Those New Kingdom kids.
Watch our punk band, the New Kingdom Kids. So hieroglyphics also carved into the stone door tell us that he had some pretty fun and cool titles. He was Royal Purification Priest, Royal Supervisor, and Inspector of the Sacred Boat.
What?
Which reminds me a lot of my signature character,
Boat Captain.
the Riverboat Captain, yes. Inspector of the Sacred Boat.
Inspector of the Sacred Boat. Wow. What truly a multi-hyphenate to start things off.
I mean, a polyglot.
Yeah. Which boat is the Sacred Boat?
I'm guessing boat to the afterlife, maybe?
It does seem, if it's purification and that sort of thing, it seems to come around to a guy who dealt with death a lot in life, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. People think that he was a priest whose basically his job was to be the mediator between the pharaohs, the gods, and the people. So
that's a big job.
I know,
because
right?
Pharaohs are a big deal, people are a big deal, gods also a big deal.
I mean, the gods are the ones I'm the most afraid of.
Yeah, keeping all of them happy.
And they had a lot. You can't please everybody. That's what Wate would tell you.
I would love his, business tips book.
So I'll send you a picture here of what this tomb looks like on the inside, because it's pretty spectacular. So when you first come in to this tomb, it's a rock-cut tomb chapel with, a long rectangular room covered in hieroglyphs and statues of the deceased. So many statues, 55 statues, to be precise. I've written here, now, I like the way I look, but 55 is too many statues.
They're all of him.
They are. No, they are.
Good. Great. That's how many self-portraits Frida Kahlo painted.
Really? Yeah. Never mind. If it's good enough for Frida, it's good enough for me. So Aidan Dodson, who is an Egyptologist at the University of Bristol, who is not involved in this project, but he's commenting on it in an email to one of these interviewers for one of these articles. And he says, quote, "What has been revealed so far is the public part of the complex where family, friends, and priests would come and leave offerings for the dead. This is an extremely important part of tomb culture. is coming to leave offerings for the dead. And what's really interesting about this tomb is that it has an example of a false door within this chapel. False door is interesting because the belief was that when you went to the afterlife and you were entombed in this way, half of your soul, your essence, your spirit would travel to the afterlife and do all the cool stuff you get to do in the afterlife. And then another half of you would stay in your tomb and watch and hang out with the people who came to visit you.
Okay.
And you would hide behind that false door.
That's great. That they build in a little like door with one of those hotel eye holes in it for you to just
Yes.
spy on whoever's coming to visit your spirit.
Yeah, you're peeping on your relatives. You're
Just
like, did you bring me something good?
Judging
Another
those
cat.
offerings.
Yeah, another cat mummy. Gosh, it must be Tuesday.
The 6 millionth dog.
You gotta stop bringing dogs. It's not doing anything. So this rectangular grave gallery is about 33 feet wide north to south and 10 feet east to west, so wide. So 33 feet long, 10 feet wide. And it's covered in painted reliefs, sculptures, and inscriptions. And so I'll send you a little floor plan here.
It's incredible how vibrant the paint still is.
Right? And you can see those statues are Wate there on the side. So that's kind of the layout. You can see that there's kind of an entrance chamber, the main kind of chapel area.
Is this little discoloration on the back the false door?
It's the false door is like right as you come in, like right through that doorway. That little enclave is the false door.
Oh, okay.
And then I'm sending you one more where you can see those little squares on the ground are the burial shafts that are filled with sand.
Okay.
These reliefs on the walls depict Wate and his wife Wertatoth and his mother Meritmine, and they're doing kind of everyday fun stuff like hunting and sailing and making offerings and doing farm work and hanging out. And there are large paintings of priests and his family fill that 18 niches. There are 26 smaller niches near the floor that hold statues that are not yet identified. So we have these kind of interesting statues where we're like, well, what are these statues of?
Oh, yeah, there are. They seem to be, they're kind of beneath him. I don't know if they're lifting him up or...
Maybe. It's possible that they're scribes writing down all the important shit he was up to.
Yeah.
There's a professor of Egyptology at the American University in Cairo named Salima Ikram, and I quoted her a lot actually in the last episode where we talk about cat mummies. Yeah. She's a zoo archaeologist.
Very cool.
She specializes in animal-based archaeology, and she basically gives a really great explanation for what tombs kind of do in ancient Egyptian culture. She says, quote, "The whole tomb acts like a resurrection machine to guarantee the dead move safely to eternity." So it's really important to have these pictures of fun shit on the walls that you could be doing because that's what you'll be doing in the afterlife. So everything depicted in your tomb is what you will have in your afterlife.
That's really interesting and sort of a lovely way to frame it in that it requires the people who are preparing and decorating the tomb to really know the person who it's for.
Yeah, it's a very personal thing.
Although, I can't help but then think of the horrifying prank twist, right? Where it's like, I hated my uncle, so I'm gonna cover his tomb with garlic rings, because he hated garlic. Garlic rings aren't even a thing, that's onion rings.
I've painted him having diarrhea forever.
Yeah, I've painted him with the cat he's allergic to.
Really stick it to him in the afterlife. So something that's very interesting about this tomb is that they had two specialists in hieroglyphics, Narim Momen and Nabil Ed Alin, examine all of these hieroglyphics because they were like, there's something weird about these hieroglyphics. There were inconsistencies in the engravings, as well as names having been scratched off and replaced on walls.
Whoa!
It's interesting because Wate's name is everywhere in this tomb. It's written on every corner, every statue. And so basically what these archaeologists are thinking is, methinks Wate doth protest too much.
Wait, No.
They also looked at these statues in the tomb, and a lot of the statues appear to be made by the same person, but there's one statue that's in front of the false door that doesn't look anything like the other statues and seems to be made, by a completely different sculptor at a completely different time. So...
Oh no! Wait, so Wate...
Let me share this quote with you from Nabil, who is one of the hieroglyphics translators. Quote, "The main statue itself is different, clearly a different person, which makes me more convinced that a conspiracy took place here. I think that Wate seized this tomb, or it was not meant for him."
Wow!
We're talking a stolen tomb. Does this tomb belong to who's buried in there?
Okay. I'm just trying to think out the implications of this, because do we think that Wate scouted a bunch of tombs to figure out whose interests align the most with his?
Well, we have a little bit more information about this.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it.
So this is continuing from the film. This is a quote from the film of these two translators talking about this conspiracy. Quote, "We have a theory, a bunch of clues. There's mention of a brother, Wate's brother. He's mentioned in the Eastern Wall, in which Wate dictates a song, quote, to the spirit of my brother. But why didn't he mention his brother's name? It is probably a kind of assurance of his conscience. He feels guilty, so the tomb was not for Wate. It could have been for his brother."
His brother.
Did he steal his brother's tomb?
That would be interesting, because that would mean that Wate, probably because the family's depicted there, that Wate is depicted in the images, but not the one you think.
Well, it's fascinating because first they had to decode all of these hieroglyphics. I got to watch a little bit of that happening in the documentary. And it's interesting because hieroglyphics can go left to right, right to left, up and down, or the opposite. So basically, when you're looking at hieroglyphics, unless you're an expert, you're not quite sure how you're going to read it even. You look for this little bird that'll tell you which way the text is going. If he's pointed like to the left, then you read it left to right. If he's pointed to the right, you read it right to left. I think that's
awesome.
Really cool. Yeah. But so before they can go unearthing the tombs themselves, they had to decode all of this stuff. Plus some safety measures, because this is a small hole in the ground. They had to secure part of the ceiling. That was a fun part of the documentary. So these 5 burial shafts. So they start to excavate these shafts, and within these shafts, they find the bones and skull of Wate and his family. But no body of brother. Brother is not there. So this kind of is again supporting this hypothesis that the tomb is stolen. It's also interesting because Wate had a very elite status, right? He was a priest and very well connected with the king, but his burial was not well pulled off or well done or done with care. His wife and children were buried standing up in one of the burial shafts, and Wate himself was mummified very badly and just put in a plain wooden box. So this is, again, like this tomb and this burial don't match. Yeah, you know what I mean?
It's like you have the beautiful, beautiful, nice plates and the beautiful table setting, and then you
And then you crash down a bucket of KFC and go eat up, bud.
Something not quite matching here.
So they get these bones, because the answer's always in the bones, people, I'll tell you that. And they send them to Dr. Shaheen so that she can determine kind of the circumstances of their death. And she's got a great quote about the bones, what bones can do for archaeology and figuring out how people lived and died. Quote, "Every piece of bone can tell you something, not only the cause of death, but what about their lives? How did they live? Was he happy? Was he healthy? Was he sad? All of these details can be ascertained from just the bones."
Was he guilty?
Was he an asshole?
Did he kill his brother?
Yeah. I mean, possibly. I have a theory. We'll get to my theory.
Okay.
So, analysis of these skeletal remains in the tomb suggests that the whole family was in really bad health. Evidence of like cystic swelling and distension of the bones lead us to think that they had some sort of disease when they died. according to Dr. Shain, Wate's skull shows that he was probably 35 years old. One of his male children was under 20, another male child under 18, and then there was a 6-year-old daughter in the tomb as well, and his wife was in her 30s. All of them show signs of a disease, so we think that they probably died most likely of malaria, which would have affected the entire family. So what they basically concluded is that because they had this disease, they were probably buried in a hurry and in a way that would not spread the disease to other people. So kind of this theory that because they were buried standing up and without coffins, they were buried, of course, in a hurry. All this doesn't look good for Wate in the stealing of the tomb case. But here's my question.
Okay.
What if the tomb was not stolen, but gifted? Here's my theory.
Yeah.
Wate and his family got sick, and they didn't expect this. But Wate's brother, perhaps he was an older brother, already had a tomb ready for him and his family. So when Wate and his family died, maybe his brother was like, I'll bury you in my already ready tomb.
What a nice thing to do.
I want to believe.
Yeah. What a great, sibling move.
Well, because we've actually, in this podcast, we've seen other things like this.
Yeah.
There was I think it was a Mongolian warlord, I think, who was going to China and died on his trip, and he couldn't make it all the way back. So he was buried in his brother's tomb.
Future Sophie here. We are talking about a guy named Tamir, and he was actually buried in his grandson's tomb, not his brother's, but, close enough.
Yeah. Do we know if the titles, the top boat boy,
inspector of spirits,
are those sobriquets that the person who the tomb was for had, or are those sobriquets that Wate had?
I think, it's very hard to tell because it's hard to tell what was changed in the tomb to be about Wate. We think that was indeed his title, but it's hard to tell because, like we said, there was a lot of inscriptions that were chiseled off and re-inscribed. So we're not quite sure. We think that was Wate's job, but again, it could have been his brother's.
If brother was the boss of purification and big into that stuff, it would feel the big into boats, big into seeing things through to the afterlife and preventing impure ritual.
Mm-hmm.
It seems in line to do would be to give away your tomb to someone who's got a very communicable disease so that they can be ferried to the afterlife safely.
I don't know. I just thought, it's a very nefarious assumption to think that the tomb was stolen, but also, we have no idea what life was like back then in ancient Egypt, and in modern Egypt, I do not know what the culture is like personally. So we can always go with the people who are from there who make these assumptions. We always, I feel like, should defer to them. But that's my theory. I know that if I died of malaria, my brother would give me his tomb. And I just kind of want to end with this quote from Dr. Amina Sharim, who is the one who examined the bones. And she's a professor at Cairo University. And she says, quote, "They, the ancient Egyptians, believed in the other life much more than believing in their first earthly life. And that's why they depict the dreams of the other life on the walls. Bones here represent their first life. That's why you get a lot of mistakes about history, seeing the great temples, the great statues, and you think everything in history was perfect. And then you see people through their bones, you discover they are like us, exactly like us." So I don't know. It makes me think that each one of these tombs down there in Saqqara, buried deep under the sand, has its own story. And, not quite what it seems, not as straightforward and perfect as we would assume,
The stories, and that maybe the stories of the people buried there are a little bit messier and more human than the stories that depict their idealized life.
Exactly. One thing about humans is we love to plan, and one thing about life is it doesn't like to go to plan.
Nope.
But that is one tomb of thousands in Saqqara, and I just thought that I would shine a little light on it, thanks to my mom for suggesting this topic to me when I told her that I wanted to do something fun. She was like, "Hey, did you hear about this?" I was like, "What?"
Thank you, Sophie's mom.
Thanks, Suzanne. So I think it might be time. I'm looking at the clock here, and I think it might be time for an ad.
Ooh.
Witchcraft, the occult, extremist beliefs, murder. Tune in to Rogue Darkness each Friday and join host Raven as I uncover horrific crimes committed under the misconceptions and misunderstandings of witchcraft and other belief systems. I'll cover a wide range of crimes involving ritualistic killings and extremist beliefs to cult persuasion and supposed possession. Anything and everything that borders the line of horrifying. There's always 3 sides to a story. Side A, Side B, and then the truth. Let's uncover the truth together and explore the darkness of mankind, one crime at a time. Available wherever you get your podcast fix, simply by searching Rogue Darkness.
Now back to the show.
Oh boy.
I wanted to have a header, and so I gave this the most pretentious name possible, and now I feel like I should actually just explain what it's about and not use the pretentious name, but...
No, please.
Now that
please.
I've said that I have a pretentious name, I think I have to read it.
You do. You've backed yourself into that.
This is called The Posthumous Adventures and Onstage Debut of one Andre Tchaikowsky.
Oh my god, yes! I am ready.
Oh yeah. My sources for this are a PBS documentary called Shakespeare Uncovered, the Royal Shakespeare Company, NPR, BBC, The Telegraph, The Guardian, Shakespeare's Globe, Joseph Weinberger Music, AndreTchaikowsky.com, The Forward, and also this story is recounted by a YouTube essayist, and Now They Sing is the name of the channel, and I found that late into my research and used it to make sure my timeline was right, and it's a great telling of what I'm about to talk about, which, from that list of sources, I think you can guess involves some Shakespeare.
Ugh, I love me some Shakespeare. I've been a Shakespeare fan since I was a tween and had to read it in class and was like, oh, do I understand this? I was like, I love how dramatic it is. If everyone just explained what they were doing, none of this would happen.
Oh yeah, we're both theater nerds, and there's going to be a little bit of background into the specific story here. But Sophie, when you think of Shakespeare, maybe even culture at large, and you think of bones, to me, at least, there is one bone in Shakespeare. It's one of the most famous bones, maybe of all time.
I think you're talking about the skull.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about that skull.
Yes.
I'm talking about Yorick the Skull.
Oh, Yorick. I knew him, Horatio.
A fellow of infinite jest of most excellent fancy. Yorick is a character who appears in post-mortem bone form in the play Hamlet.
I love a post-mortem appearance.
We love a post-mortem bone form appearance. And he's the recently murdered king's jester, who used to entertain Hamlet as a child. And just for some context, for those of you who are not as familiar with the show, late in the play, Hamlet has been through a lot. He's survived some assassination attempts. He's sort of accidentally on purpose killed some people.
Yes, you could frame it that way, yes.
He comes across a grave digger who is burying Yorick in the ground, and Hamlet's like, hey, who are these bones? And the grave digger's like, oh, this is Yorick, that guy who you thought was really cool when you were young. And when Hamlet realizes this, he gets really reflective, and he picks up the skull to talk to it. And that's where we get the image of Hamlet, or truly anyone else, holding a skull facing it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and there we get the universal sign for doing theater.
For doing theater.
Which is holding a skull before you and being dramatic about it.
Yeah, take it from us. If you want to be a serious actor, you just hold up a skull and look at it.
Oh, I do it every time. Every time I do this podcast, I gotta take a skull, I gotta look at it, gotta say, remember your training.
Yeah, and it starts alas poor Yorick. That's the famous beginning. But the sort of content of the speech overall is about Hamlet thinking about how everybody, whether it's the people he's loved and lost, the people who he hates but are still alive, but that all of them...
Those are the worst.
There's the worst ones. Oh, Mom!
Oh, goodness.
He's got a lot of issues at this point. He had a lot of issues from the beginning, but at this point, they're just piling up. But it's that all of these people are eventually gonna be skulls. It's his version. I was sort of thinking of those, like, BuzzFeed articles where it's like, remember these childhood icons? They're bones now. Remember Yorick, that children's entertainer? Now he's bones.
Now he's bones. Yeah, that also makes me think, how long ago did Yorick die? Mm-hmm. Because now he's bones? And bones. Why is he getting exhumed and reburied?
Yeah.
What's going on with Yorick? Did they have to move him? Why is he bones and getting buried?
Yeah, this is where I confess that Hamlet's not the play that I know the most about, and I bet there's really interesting scholarship about that context, about why is he both bones and being dug up, or dug in. But yeah, this scene and Hamlet's interaction with Yorick's skull is, I would posit, my hot take, I would say Yorick's skull is one of the most famous skulls of all time.
I would agree with you.
And it's definitely, like, if you are a skull, the preeminent role you could have on stage.
Oh, yes.
I think, of all the skulls you could be on stage, Yorick's the big one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of another skull in a play.
There's, like, maybe in the background in a crypt or something, or...
I don't know, Phantom of the Opera,
yeah,
you got skulls?
Opera. Maybe there's, like, a show where there's a professor who looks smart because they have a skull on their desk.
Yeah, but that's who that comes back to?
You know who that comes back to? It all comes back to Yorick, the funny man.
That's what I'm always saying. It's all come back to Yorick.
Yeah. And so what this is going to be about is about the history of the skull that is used on stage to represent Yorick. And because normally in productions these days, the Yorick skull is a fake skull. It's not a real skull. It's like a prop that you would use. But in the original days, and sometimes in between, there is some history of using real skulls for the Yorick scene.
That's amazing. I'm gonna put that in my will.
Yeah, well, that's what this is gonna be about. Oh, you bet.
Sophie, shut your mouth.
So, yeah, in the 1600s, in early Shakespeare times, historians think that it was most likely that theaters who were looking for a skull to use on stage would bribe a church to get a skull from there, from the charnel house. That was a lot easier than taking the time to make a perfect skull replica.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are you gonna do? Sit there by candlelight and fucking whittle a skull? No, you're like, Danny died 2 years ago. I'm gonna go grab it.
Yeah, you just go bribe a church. But over time, it becomes easier to make replicas, and using real skulls kind of falls out of practice. There's some theater critics who write these essays in the 1700s that are like, stop using a real skull, it's gross and tacky, and I won't stand for it.
I don't know, I'm of two minds on it. Like, if you're taking a skull from someone's final resting place and they have no idea that this is happening, I say put the skull back.
Yeah.
They didn't want this. But if they were an actor and, that's something that they wanted.
Yeah.
I don't know, that wouldn't be tacky, that might be cool.
Yeah. And there are some famous examples of this, and I'm going to go through like two small ones and then we'll kind of get to the big one. But so Edwin Booth, who was the more successful actor brother of John Wilkes Booth, he had a lucky Yorick skull that he inherited from his father, who was also a Shakespearean actor. And this was the skull of a horse thief named Fontaine, who Edwin, the one who was not bad, had shared a jail cell with. So the dad had been in jail with this horse thief named Fontaine. Oh my God. And the dad was going to be released, but Fontaine was going to be hanged. And Fontaine was like, hey.
For stealing horses?
Yeah. I guess, Jesus. Yeah. And okay. Fontaine was like, hey, can you send my jail cellmate my skull after I'm dead so that he can use it on stage?
I mean, that's nice. How long were they in jail? How good of friends did they get?
I don't know. I guess good enough that they were like, yeah, we'll mail him the
your skull to. And they did it.
They did it, and it's still on display today, and it has written on it Hamlet's dying words from the play.
That is... that's so cool.
Yeah.
Where is that at?
It's in New York. There's like a theater club in honor of Edwin Booth, and it has the skull on display. And Sarah Bernhardt, who was famous for her taking on the role as Hamlet, despite that being like a thing that women hadn't done a lot, but she was doing it, and
she was like, I will put on these puffy pants and show you bitches how it's done.
Exactly. She had a skull that was gifted to her by Victor Hugo.
Whoa,
yeah,
really?
Yeah, he was like, here's a skull I have. Use it when you travel the
get
world. Well, I don't know. He was so weirdo.
He was so weirdo.
But those are a few stories about Yorick's, but that was many centuries ago, or a few centuries ago, and by and large, that practice has fully fallen out, with one notable exception. So we're going to talk about Andre Tchaikowsky.
Yes.
Yeah.
The namesake of this story.
The namesake of this story. We were going to get to him eventually.
Of course.
And I'm going to call him Andre for most of this. Not because I don't have great respect for him, but because Andre Tchaikowsky was an acclaimed Polish pianist and composer, but he's not Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. This is a different Tchaikovsky. This is Andre.
This is Andre. Don't try to tell me it's
He's
Peter.
Not the Nutcracker guy. This is a different Tchaikovsky.
This guy hated Nutcracker. Sugar Plum Fairies, fucking forget about it.
Big beef with them. And a lot of this story is going to be about what happened to Andre after he died. But I do want to talk a little bit about Andre's life, too, because it was also very interesting. So Andre's born Robert Andre Krauthammer in 1935 in Poland, and that's a really scary time to be a Polish Jew. And his parents smuggle him out of a Warsaw ghetto when he's a kid to live with his grandmother. And he takes on the name Andre Tchaikowsky at that point because it's the false name that his papers gave him. But he keeps that name for the rest of his life.
Wow.
And living with his grandmother, he discovers he has this talent for piano. And he becomes this really accomplished pianist. And he is able to reunite with his family after the war. There's this really happy reunion.
Good.
And he becomes an acclaimed musician. And he's perhaps best known for being a pianist, but he is also really interested in Shakespeare, and he writes an opera adaptation of The Merchant of Venice. That's his sort of best-known composition. And it's very much in conversation with the way Judaism is portrayed in that text. It's famously one where Shakespeare is grappling with or addressing the mistreatment that Jews face in a way that some people feel is anti-Semitic, and it's really not clear.
That's a whole other...
Oh, yeah. It's a whole
kettle of Jewish worms.
Yeah.
But I feel you on that. It's The Merchant of Venice is a hard one because, you can tell Shakespeare is trying to do something.
He's trying to do something.
Yeah, but he's trying to do it in the 1500s.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be what we would like it to be. But I find it interesting and very, I don't know, it's a great investigation to have a Jewish man who's been through the strongest anti-Semitism, in the last couple hundred years that there's been to reimagine this show.
Yeah, and a sense I get from hearing what he said about that piece of work and just his relationship to Shakespeare in general is that this is a guy who I think, like many of us in theater, particularly as a Jewish person, really like Shakespeare, really love these plays or grew up with them or feel a strong connection to them, but also have to reckon with the parts of it that we don't like or that feel like they target us or don't treat us the way that we wish they don't give us the grace that we wish that they give other characters. That's a not very eloquent way of saying that. But Andre, in adapting The Merchant of Venice, he's very much thinking about that. He's a guy who's a big fan of Shakespeare generally, and he goes to the Royal Shakespeare Company a lot to see their productions. And I'm going to call them the RSC, because they play a pretty big role in this. They're basically the preeminent Shakespeare theater to this day. And he goes to see their production of Hamlet, and he hates the prop skull they're using for Yorick. He complains in a letter that it looks plasticky and fake, and it ruins the scene.
I mean, honestly, I kind of agree with him. Yeah. If you're touting a Spirit Halloween skull in your, like, hyper-realistic Hamlet, I'm not buying it.
It's not good. And sadly, Andre dies young, but one thing that he does is that he donates his body to science, but his skull he bequeaths to the Royal Shakespeare Company for, I quote, use in theatrical performances.
You fucking jags, get it right. I'm giving you literally what you need.
Yeah. And
I love that.
so,
I fucking love that.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm gonna put my skull where my mouth is. You have a bad skull, you can use mine.
Exactly. So there's a few reasons for it. One of them, he's like, hey, RSC, I love you, fan of your work. Your skull sucks. Have a good one.
Yeah, your skull stinks. Love you.
Yeah, exactly. And the second reason is that he's a concert pianist. He performs a lot, and he wanted to be able to perform even after his death.
Oh my God, that touches a string in my heart.
I know. It's a really lovely sentiment, and there's a sort of a third part that I found a quote about which tickled me, which is that he had sort of said, I've grappled my whole life with whether Shakespeare was anti-Semitic, and he says, I quote, if he was, it would give me a great pleasure to have a Jewish skull wandering around his Hamlet.
Hell yeah, stick it to him. If he did not like Jews, well, buddy, there's a Jew performing in every prominent, Royal Shakespeare Company production of Hamlet. Yeah.
And so, eventually, the Royal Shakespeare Company gets a skull in the mail.
Oh my God. Did anyone tell them it was coming?
I think they kind of were informed. I think they got a message saying, like, hey, Andre, who's a patron of, the RSC, you know him, he's regretfully passed away, he wants to give you his skull. Can he? And they're kind of like, I guess? Yeah, okay. Yes? So they get a skull in the mail, but they don't really know what to do with it, so they put it on the roof to air it out. And they leave it on the roof to air out for 2 years.
What? Guys, it rains there!
Yeah, this is what I could find. I don't know if it got caught in the rain, I don't know if it was an outdoor patio, I don't know about this airing out process, but it took 2 years.
Was it at the fucking Globe?
I don't think it was at the Globe. I think it was at their, prop storage place.
Jeepers creeps. Come on. This is... Every prop master listening to this is pulling their face off right now.
Yeah. Come on, tell me you're a prop master who doesn't know how to properly clean a skull?
Yeah, seriously, get some domestic beetles on that bullshit. Come on.
So 2 years later, it's deemed sufficiently aired out, and they put the skull in a tissue-lined cardboard box in prop storage. This is the box it arrived in. And they say, hey, someday we're gonna honor this request. We're gonna get this skull on stage as Yorick.
Yes.
Yeah.
They better.
Yeah, they better. Smash cut to 1989. 7 years later, the RSC is staging a production of Hamlet with Mark Rylance as Hamlet. He's like a stage actor. He pops up in a lot of Spielberg movies. He got an Oscar for Bridge of Spies, everyone's favorite Spielberg movie.
Ooh. Oh, yes, everyone's favorite Bridge of Spies.
We love Bridge of Spies, our favorite movie.
I'm a big Bridge of Spies head.
Yeah. You go to the screenings every Saturday at midnight. Shout at the screen. Your favorite
I do.
Bridge of Spies
I wear
things.
my Bridge of Spies costume that obviously everyone can picture. I don't have to tell you what it looks like.
We all dress as our favorite character. A man in a suit.
Yes. I dress as the bridge.
Ooh! Clever. It's like people who go to Sound of Music sing-alongs dressed up as, the Hills.
That's amazing.
But Mark Rylance, he's a big Shakespearean actor. He's a scholar of Shakespeare and Shakespeare history. And so he goes and he's like, hey, can I, use the Tchaikowsky skull? Can I use Andre's skull? So they get the skull for him out of storage and he starts rehearsing with it. And through this process, the role of the skull actually grows until Hamlet, carries it with him on stage for all of Act 5. Not just that one scene.
Oh my God. I love that.
But here it gets a little sad.
Oh no. As
they get deeper into rehearsals, the cast and crew start to get really squeamish about the idea of using a real skull. Especially now that it's on stage for so much. They're like, break, is it disrespectful if it gets dropped? How it feels weird to be this close to the skull, knowing that it was this guy. And so I have some rehearsal notes from the time that sort of chart the story of this skull. February 13th. Mark Rylance is asked whether it would be possible to use the real skull that was donated to the RSC as Yorick's skull. March 23rd. We will be using the real skull for Yorick, but we'll need a standby in case of accident. April 7th. We are no longer using the real skull as Yorick, but would like to use a cast of it complete with teeth. So what they end up doing is that they end up making a very high-quality replica of Andre's specific skull, and they use that on stage rather than the skull itself.
Okay, that's a compromise.
So,
that I think, I don't know. If I was him, I'd be like, come on, guys.
Yeah. And, yeah, some people in the crew, I think, in cast sort of feel that way. Some people want to use it, but the overwhelming feeling is that it might just be too much. And there's an interesting quote from the show's music director, Claire Van Kampen, who said that in sort of her understanding of the consensus was that it, using a real skull damaged the complicity of illusion between actor and audience. And I think the idea there is that audiences wouldn't suspend their disbelief for the rest of the play if it's a real skull, because you don't need to suspend your disbelief. Like, the idea of theater is artifice, and that you're breaking some sort of promise to the audience that it's artifice if you bring in a real skull, which is kind of interesting, but also it's like, that's an excuse he gave later.
I don't know. I think I will say there is some validity to that, I guess. But I will also, I want to flip that and also say that that's a very myopic view of theater and how we experience theater. Because when I experience theater and when I do theater, even if the situation is not real, my emotions are genuine. So, like, I think, you know, there's varying levels of what is quote unquote real, you know, realism, verisimilitude, whatever. But I don't think having a real skull on stage breaks the fourth wall in any way or breaks the illusion or the world of theater. That's just my opinion.
Based on, I wonder if some of it was that they felt like the audience would just be creeped out.
I mean, I can understand that, but also, like, if you've seen any Shakespeare play, like almost any Shakespeare play, someone beefs it on stage, probably. Yeah. Like, someone beefs it on stage either in a horribly violent way or, like, an emotionally traumatic way. So, like, is the, like, horrible murders of, you know, Titus Andronicus or, you know, the smothering of Desdemona any more violent and horrific than the skull of a person who wished to be there?
Yeah, I largely
that's
agree.
my question. Yeah. I'm not interrogating you on this subject. I'm just saying, you know, in the wide, you know, you and I have strong theater opinions.
Yeah, I think, and one thing that I think is interesting too is that the content of the scene in Hamlet is Hamlet seeing a skull and freaking out because it was this real specific person he knew. And here's these actors and stage professionals freaking out because this skull is the skull of a real person that they knew.
I mean, but I also, like, feel like I get that. I'm torn. Because, like, if I was an actor, I mean, the actor made the choice to bring this skull on stage, but if I'm, like, Ophelia and I have to hang out, like, not in Act 5, but, like, I have to, like, hang out with this skull backstage, that might creep me out.
Yeah. And so after all these conversations, they take this replica, they use the replica, and Rylance does credit the replica with helping his performance, but the skull itself goes back into storage. And the RSC stages several productions of Hamlet, none with Andre even being considered by the casting director for his dream role.
Oh, that's so stupid. He's so good.
He's really good. He's really the prime candidate for the role. We're gonna smash cut to 2008.
Yes,
oh
yes.
Boy, oh
smash
boy.
cut to 2008. To you.
It's 2008, and the Royal Shakespeare Company is doing Hamlet again. And this is a high-profile production, because they got some big names on board. They've got nerd icon David Tennant as Hamlet.
Oh, the burning of my young loins.
And it's 2008, so this is like peak Tennant time. We got nerd icon Patrick Stewart as Claudius.
Yes, work it.
Tickets are selling like hotcakes, and the director, Gregory Dornan, wants this production to be the production that fulfills Andre's dream.
Hell fucking yeah.
He goes to David Tennant. He's like, how do you feel about using Andre's skull? David Tennant loves the idea. He says, I'm going to draw inspiration for the scene from it.
Of course he does, you little freak.
He's going to do it. So they start rehearsing with it, and they have every intent for this skull to finally make its Royal Shakespeare Company debut on stage in Hamlet. But at the last minute, they realize that because Andre's skull is less than 100 years old, they have to get clearance from the Human Tissue Authority to make sure it's being used safely and properly.
Oh my god, of course they do. Of course they do.
Yeah, the Human Tissue Authority is there to make sure that you're using bones correctly.
I mean, we love the Human Tissue Authority, but also, come on, Human Tissue Authority, don't be fucking narcs.
So they send the paperwork, and it takes a little bit of extra time for the paperwork to go through because the Human Tissue Authority has never gotten a request like this before.
I bet not.
They get, hey, can we use Andre's skull on stage in Hamlet? And they're like, what? There is not a precedent for this.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to talk to my manager.
Yeah, so goes up the chain of command, and they start doing some preview performances with a fake skull. But at the very last minute, the paperwork comes through.
Hell yeah!
Yeah, and by press night, Tchaikowsky, Andre Tchaikowsky's wish is realized, and he makes his posthumous on-stage debut as Yorick.
Hell fucking yeah,
The
God.
big victory.
I know he could hear that applause from the afterlife. I know that he could. So I know this production particularly well because I have this.
You have the DVD? Okay.
I have the DVD.
We're gonna come back to that in a second then. So, Andre's wish is realized. He makes his debut as Yorick. And now,
oh my God,
we're actually gonna go into a performance review of Andre as Yorick.
Yes, let's see what the critics said.
We've been talking about this skull, but I have not really described it to you.
No.
And because it's been in storage the whole time, the press photos from this show are the first time that we have photos of it.
Oh my God.
So I'm going to send you some photos of the skull. It's just the cranial part that they use on stage. They don't use the lower jaw.
Okay.
And
probably a little precarious.
Why don't you look at these photos and kind of describe the skull for me? What are some things you notice about the skull?
So right off the bat, something about the skull is that it's got a fun variety of color. It's a little discolored on the front. Looks like almost maybe like it's got dirt going on the front, or a little like blackened in the front.
Yeah,
we've got a missing tooth. And I actually like the aesthetic of no jaw. I think that's it really, to me, it adds to the scene, especially if, like we were talking about, Yorick is being like disinterred for some reason. Yeah, but it's, fits in the palm of your hand. And it does look a little rough, though, I'll say that.
It does. It sort of explains why they had to air it out for 2 years, I think. You see that and you're like, oh, yeah.
Is that... Did they not clean it before they sent it to the fucking place?
It is clean enough to use, but it's not... It has this sort of charred residue on it and this discoloration. It's not a beautifully polished, shiny white skull, right? This isn't the plastic skull that Andre so abhors seeing in his Shakespeare.
Yes, but I think, we had talked about that quote of the person being like that it ruins, the illusion of the play. But I think this is the best possible prop you could have for this because it looks like a real skull, because it fucking is a real skull.
Yeah, and like I don't know if I would know the difference between looking at a beautiful replica versus a real skull. If someone told me, I'd be inclined to believe them. But looking at this and knowing that it's a real skull, you really believe it.
You really do.
It looks real. It looks specific. It looks exhumed.
Yeah, it looks grimy.
It's a little grimy.
As a skull should. Yeah.
This is the skull that we see on stage, and interestingly, the Royal Shakespeare Company doesn't tell people at first that they're using Andre's skull. They don't make this public, so at first nobody in the audience knows. And then at some point, David Tennant mentions it in an interview because they're asking about his process, I think. And he mentions that this skull was a part of his process. And the word gets out. And at first, the Royal Shakespeare Company gets a lot of free publicity from it. But it starts to pop up all across the tabloids and starts eclipsing the rest of the production and causing a distraction. The tabloids are like, they're using a real skull!
Get over yourselves.
Yeah, it's like, I guess audiences were like leaning over and elbowing each other, being like,
yeah.
Hey, that's the skull of acclaimed pianist Andre Tchaikowsky.
Yeah.
But it's starts to be seen as a distraction.
Yeah, I can see that.
Which is sad because, again, a wonderful performance.
Yeah, it's the role he was meant to play.
It's the role he was meant to play. He's doing an incredible job. But after 22 performances, the Royal Shakespeare Company announces that they are going to be replacing Andre's skull with a replica. And the rest of the run goes smoothly, but alas, ostensibly bonelessly.
Ugh, my least favorite kind of performance.
Except there's a twist. Oh, yes. 9 months later, doing some promotional circuits for the filmed adaptation of the show that you have, the director, Gregory Doran.
The director, as we like to call him.
The Greg director. So 9 months later, the director, Gregory Doran, reveals that while they said they had swapped the skull for a fake, they didn't, and it was Andre all along.
It was Andre all along. Hey, it was Andre all along. Amazing.
Yes, and it being Andre all along includes and encompasses the filmed recording. So that version that you have the DVD of, you can see Andre on screen.
Oh my god.
Playing the role of Yorick.
Oh my god.
And it's really good. I think the way that they shoot the scene is really good, and the way that it highlights the skull is framed as a character in the scene. It's, I think, really beautifully shot. I think Tennant's performance is really good, but this is a widely available recording of the play, so if you are listening, you can go find it at a library or online, and you can watch it. You can see the scene out of context on YouTube, and you can judge Andre's performance for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, having realized that I have seen this performance is amazing. First off, this is my favorite performance of Hamlet ever that I've ever seen. That's why I have the DVD. When I saw it, like I mentioned before, I had a crush on David Tennant. But this, and was a giant Shakespeare nerd. I met my best friends at Shakespeare camp. And so we have watched this several times, and I love everything about it. I think his performance is one of the most honest portrayals of Hamlet, where you don't hate him.
Yeah.
Like, you don't, like, a lot of performances of Hamlet, you're like, gosh, would you shut the fuck up and just really do something that's going to help you instead of just making your situation worse.
Yep.
But this performance, you feel for Hamlet in a way that I hadn't felt for him before. And I do remember that scene specifically, and it is absolutely fantastic. Also, big ups to the black reflective floor.
Yeah.
That's part of the set, which is an amazing theater set.
Yeah, it's a really cool production, and the way that they film it is on locations, not necessarily on stage. Mm-hmm. So they have all these cinematic tools, and in the Last Poor Yorick scene, when Hamlet's talking about how fun Yorick used to be and his childhood memories, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar, it's just this really close shot of the skull that like slowly zooms in on it.
And to know that's a real guy.
It's this real guy who did perform for people and bring joy to people through his performance.
Yes, that's... Wow, I think I'm fully on team Real Skull for this one.
Yeah, I think it makes the scene really special, and I think it does show in the performance. And I have a really, really long quote here, but there's a documentary that PBS produced about Hamlet, and it included a segment of David Tennant going backstage, and he shows Andre's skull to the cameras, and he had just this really lovely quote that I couldn't quite cut down, but you can in editing if you'd like to.
No, let it rip.
But David Tennant, he holds up the skull and he shows it to the camera and he says, "This is our Yorick. He was a Polish composer and pianist called Andre Tchaikowsky, and when he died in the early 80s, he bequeathed his head to be used in a production of Hamlet with the Royal Shakespeare Company. He wanted to play Yorick, so here he is. This is Andre. He was introduced to us by our director Greg on the first day of rehearsals as the final member of our company. There was a variety of reactions to having a real human head in the production. Some people find it quite difficult. I must say personally I was rather excited by it. It's one of the cliches of the play now, an actor holding a skull, and I suppose the trouble with cliché is that it loses meaning. But if you're presented with an actual person's skull, a real bit of human, then Hamlet's speech about Yorick, and staring at the skull of a man he knew well, it becomes all the more potent when you're actually aware that you're holding somebody's head quite literally in your hands. There he is, Andre was there. I feel very pleased to have helped him fulfill his ambition."
Fuck. I'm not gonna cut that down. That, I think that's beautiful. We talk a lot about death on this podcast and how so many cultures have devised ways to live on. In our last week's episode, we talked a lot about death planning and ways you can extend your life past your death, metaphorically. But this is my favorite that I've ever heard, because like you said, he was a performer for his life. That's what he loved. And to spend, his afterlife on stage with, amazing actors in this incredible performance. Because if he had been used in some fucking junk band, gross, terrible performance, no, this is top notch. And it's, I think it's the most respectful thing they could have done for him was to fulfill that wish.
I think so too. And I think the way they were able to do it with respect, I think as artists, when you think about ways to live on or immortalize yourself, obviously through art is one that comes up. And you can do that through the work that you created while you're alive. And this is just a spin on it that I wouldn't have considered, because you don't really think of Yorick as a prop in the play, but not as a character so much necessarily. But he is a character, and he's a person, and I love the framing of him as a member of the company.
Yeah, that's what really hit me and almost made me cry, was that the director said, and this is, the last member of our company. It's that he got to be included in something like this even after his death.
I was reading a little bit about sort of critical analysis of the scene outside of the context of this specific story. But on the Globe Theatre's blog, there was a professor named Paul Menzer who, in his analysis of the scene, sort of in the way that Hamlet's talking to Yorick and saying, all people who are alive will all become a skull. You used to be a person and now Yorick is a skull. His analysis of the scene is sort of that it reminds us that while we imagine we are actors, in the end we all turn into props.
Damn.
And that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
But it also, to some extent, it feels like the way that the role that Andre's skull was allowed to play in this production of Hamlet returns it to an actor.
Yes,
from a prop.
Exactly. Like you said, turns Yorick from an abstract thing to a concrete thing, a concrete person. And I think that services it services this particular wish, but it also services, I think, the play as a whole, services whoever's playing Hamlet the best.
I think it's a really special and sort of generous bequeathment. And also one that I'm really happy was realized. And that's the story of Andre Tchaikowsky's skull. And Andre Tchaikowsky, the actor.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's one of my favorite things I think anyone's ever brought, is this amazing story of an actor who finally got to play a dream role.
Yeah.
It would have been such a bummer if they never used him. I would have written several strongly worded letters.
Yeah, it was really, when I was reading through the story, when they got to the tissue association, I was like, no. It's just setback after setback, and some of it sort of cultural taboo, and some of it the increasing, I think, important scientific guidelines based on more knowledge about how to handle human remains safely.
Yeah, because I think I don't want anyone to get from this that you should handle skulls willy-nilly, because I would bet that David Tennant took great care with this skull, and, the guy who was originally doing it, they were so concerned about droppage that they did not use it, but, you always have to handle human remains with the utmost respect and safety. So we do appreciate the Human Tissue Association?
Let me double check, I think
the corporals of corpses, the Duke of...
the Human Tissue Authority.
The Human Tissue Authority, because they're British and they have a lot of authority. We're the Tissue Authority. We've come to take your skull.
We are here to tell you that your skull shall not be in Hamlet until we say so.
Yes, you must air it out on the roof.
Until we stamp it.
Yes, that is the protocol. Well, that was fantastic. That was amazing. Thank you so much for bringing this cranial tale to our show.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about Bones, anything Bones, at least the theme song comes from the stage.
It's true.
And
that The stage is baked in.
Stage is baked in, and what better way to honor that than to return to the stage?
As we are all desperately trying to do in this time, return to the stage. But, the stage is here in our hearts. And, the fun thing about this story is it tells us that, you don't have to stop performing when you beef it.
Yeah, just make sure that you find a medical company that's willing to grab your skull, I guess, and a theater company that doesn't already have one.
Exactly, because God forbid there's two, and that's awkward. Then you have to have auditions.
There was someone who was like, hey, Royal Shakespeare Company, can I donate my skull? And they were like, with all due respect, we already have one.
We already have one. I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. We really... Yeah, maybe another Shakespeare Company. We got Andre.
We got Andre.
And with
he's
all due respect,
guy.
He's really good.
Do you have anything that you wanna plug?
Ooh. Well, I when I post my artwork and illustrations, I tend to post on my Instagram, which is @CamillaStrader. That's Camilla and Illustrator smushed together. And if you would like to listen to some trivia I have written, my trivia show that I write for is sadly finished production, but it's called Ask Me Another, and it has aired on NPR for the past 9 years. And so if you want to go listen to the back catalog, you should go do that. There are hours and hours of fun facts, some of which were written by me.
Yeah, and from this podcast, bitch knows fun facts. Thank you again for being on. This was fantastic, and thank you for honoring us with your artwork and your presence.
Thank you so much for having me on, and for asking me to do the artwork, and for giving me the opportunity to share facts about something that I researched, which I want to do.
You do love facts.
I do. I love facts.
There's one thing I know.
Oh, I just wanted to fulfill my promise of a teasin that I made at the beginning of the episode.
Oh, yes.
So, Sophie, at the beginning of the episode, you had asked what the skull on the logo was.
Yes.
And I had said that I would make an announcement at the end of this episode. And so if I may be the keeper of Anything Bones podcast art canon.
Lore.
Yes. If I may be the keeper of Anything Bones podcast artwork lore.
Yes.
I would like to make it canon that skull is Andre.
Yes! That is Andre. We'll call him that from now on. Camilla, you're a genius, and you're right. And you've done this all along.
We'll pretend I knew the whole time.
Yes, that is canon. That is lore. Before we go, for pictures from this episode, head on over to the Anything Bones Instagram and check those out. If you have any bone stories you'd love to hear about, especially for Spooky October, feel free to submit them on the website. This has been an amazing episode. We're ramping into Spooky October like a bat out of hell. And there's only one last thing to do on this episode, and it's to say bon voyage. Would you care to do it with me?
I would love to.
All right, count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Bon voyage!
We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bon voyage!
Thanks for listening to Anything Bones. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Anything Bones Podcast, or email us at anythingbonespodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you to Nick Kruger for our spooky music and Stephen Vetteroff
At Chubby Scrubby on Twitter.
for our jazzy vocals, and thank you to Camilla Franklin
At Camilla Strader on Instagram.
for our beautiful bony artwork. Please rate, review, and subscribe.
I do have a mini epilogue, and I feel like it's like a slight change in tone, but it is related to improv, which, because we share that
Yes.
in our past, I did want to touch on.
All right.
This is about Del Close, who's an improv luminary, and a sort of pioneering comedian who founded, was he Second City? Is that, I'm realizing I don't
think
remember.
so. I don't know.
Let me make sure I know.
I know about bones.
Yeah, I know about Bones. Del Close, who was an influential figure in improv comedy. He's well known for working with Charna Halpern, and was the inventor of a format called the Herald,
Yes.
which is sort of the bane of many improvisers' existences. But he actually, more recently, he left a Tchaikowsky-like provision in his will,
Mhm.
where he wanted to give his skull to the Goodman Theater for a production of Hamlet. in which to play Yorick or for any other purposes the Goodman Theater deems appropriate. So this is something that he said. He was like, Andre, he's got it. He's got the right idea. I love this sentiment. I love this idea. So he does a similar provision. And his creative partner, Charna Halpern, presents the artistic director of the Goodman Theater with a skull. She's like, here's Dell's skull. Now you can honor it, use it on stage. And then people start to, like, realize that the skull doesn't match things they knew about Del Close.
Uh-oh.
Like, it had some wiring in it that was too old, and that, like, the teeth weren't quite right.
Uh-oh.
And they're like, hey, Charna? Hey, Charna Halpern? Hey, is this a skull? Did you get the right skull?
Hey, bud. Hey. Is this the right skull?
You got the right skull here? And at first she's like, of course it is. But eventually, she reveals to the New Yorker that she bought the skull from the Skokie Anatomical Chart Company.
Bitch.
Because it's not really her. What happened is that she was trying really hard to honor his wishes, and she was like calling up different medical organizations. It's like, hey, could you remove someone's skull so that he can play Yorick? And the medical associations were like, we don't really do that. That's not a thing we do.
Yeah, I would imagine that's something that funeral homes, like, don't do.
No,
and,
it's not.
You know, I think there are places where you can donate your body where they will portion you out, as it were. But I would imagine that's hard to find.
Yeah, but it wasn't really well planned through, and so Charna Halpern was not able to actually get Del Close's skull, and so instead of saying that, she bought, it was a real skull, but not Dell's, from an anatomical, like, science study company, and just pretended it was his for, like, 7 years.
Oh my god. That is kind of nuts.
So that's just like a weird little improv side story. I think that sharing it kind of ruins the loveliness of Andre's story, but because it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
I kind of just did want to share it.